bones. And what was the commandment concerning his bones? As we're going to see, Joseph said, you're going to be leaving here. And when you go, take my bones with you. I wouldn't be caught dead here. I want you to take me out when you go. You're going on to Canaan. You're going to the promised land. I'll be dead. My body will molder and turn to dust. My bones will remain. And when you go, take my bones with you. Now, what on earth does that mean? And what does that say to us today? Well, I want to talk to you today about the blessings in a box of bones. The blessings in a box of bones. You see, Joseph knew that he was going to die. Didn't bother him one scintilla of an iota. He's not bothered at all. He's ready to die. Are you ready to die? The Bible tells us in the book of Hebrews that one of Satan's ways to keep people in bondage is through the fear of death. And the Bible tells us in that same passage that Jesus, through death, destroyed him that had the power of death, that is, the devil. That is, if you're still afraid to die, it means two things. You're afraid of the power of death and the devil, and number two, that you don't really understand what Jesus Christ did for you. Friend, look here, let me tell you something. You're not ready to live until you're no longer afraid to die. Now, I'm not afraid to die. Not at all. Not at all. Now, I can tell you that I may be afraid of the act of dying, but I'm not afraid to die. I'm not afraid of the consequences of death. Neither was Joseph. But a lot of people are. Man is the only creature that knows he's going to die, and he's trying desperately to forget it. If you don't believe that, look around and see the elderly woman with too much makeup. Look at the man way past middle age, driving a sports car with a gold chain around his neck, trying to look like a teenager. And when people die, the funeral place is festooned with flowers, and the cemetery is made to look like a memorial park. Few people go to funerals. Few people watch people die. We don't like to think of death, and if you talk about death, they'll change the subject like switching channels on the television set. And if you continue, they'll look at you like you have smallpox. They won't talk about death. But death, if you know the Lord Jesus Christ, is not an enemy, but a friend that will usher you into the presence of Jesus Christ. Now here's Joseph. Joseph was wise enough to know that he's going to die. He's still alive. He's 110 years of age, and he knows that he doesn't have much time, and so he has made a commandment concerning his bones, and he said, God's going to take you out of Egypt. God's going to bring you to the land of Canaan, and when he does, you take my bones with you. And the writer of the book of Hebrews chose that to illustrate the great, magnificent faith that Joseph had. Now, what is the blessing in a box of bones? May I give you a skeleton outline?
Serious rhetoric coming out of China. The People's Liberation Army will not sit idly by. What can we expect from China if Nancy Pelosi does show up?
Well, Hua Chunying, the foreign ministry spokeswoman who you heard there, is known for her pretty robust rhetoric on these sorts of issues, and we probably will see something like a formation of fighter jets who have actually been seen in the skies of Taiwan for quite a few months recently now, probably scramble to do a display of military might in the day or two that Nancy Pelosi is expected to be on the island of Taiwan. So in other words, it's a reminder that China is slowly but surely building up its military strength in the region and has plans over the next few years to essentially reunify Taiwan. But I don't think the indication is meant to be that that's going to happen during the next 48 hours.
Well, neither Xi Jinping nor Joe Biden have any interest in triggering a conflict, and this visit has not been backed by the White House. So what are the options that are open to China in real terms?
In the short term, there really isn't that much that they can do other than make a sort of almost literally saber-rattling kind of display with the fighter planes and so forth. The reason is that President Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, is coming up for an unprecedented third term in office. It'll take him from 10 to 15 years if that goes through. And that's likely to be at the big Communist Party Congress in Beijing, probably in October this year. I think that internally in Chinese politics, the absolute number one priority is not to do anything that might upset the smooth transition of Xi to his third term. So while a display of power in terms of Taiwan is something that might boost his position, the idea of something that might actually trigger conflict with the United States is, I think, absolutely off the slate, at least for the rest of this year.
And what about the economic damage that might be done? China is Taiwan's largest trading partner.
That's exactly right. Both sides have actually got each other in a bit of a grip, because Taiwan is still dependent on about $500 billion dollars worth of trade going into China year by year. That's a huge amount. And we shouldn't forget that Taiwan is very small compared to mainland China, but it's a huge economy in global terms. But the Chinese also need at least one thing desperately from Taiwan, and that is globally top standard semiconductor computer chips. They're only made in a few places. They're made in Taiwan, they're made in South Korea, to some extent in the US. They're not made in mainland China. And without those chips, China's industries essentially would find themselves in big trouble. So both sides are dependent on a relatively smooth economic relationship, at least for some years to come.
And when we look at the kind of extension of saber rattling, is it possible that we might see more missile testing near the island?
Yes, I think one has to say that after the Party Congress I've mentioned has happened, the position between Taiwan, China and the United States has the potential to become much more tricky, much more dangerous, because China has made it clear that over the medium term, whatever that might mean, perhaps later in the 2020s, they do intend to push for a unification of Taiwan within China's own system, within the People's Republic. And that means that missile tests, but also attempts perhaps to build up further troops on the eastern coast of China, and the development of areas like submarine and amphibious naval technology are things we can expect to see being ramped up on the Chinese side, as I say, not the next few weeks and months, but certainly in the next few years.
And what do you make of Russia weighing in today, warning the United States that this visit would put it on a collision course with China?
Russia's doing everything it can to try and make sure that it's seen as being on the same side as China, because of course it's very grateful to China for things like taking the oil and gas which can no longer be sold in the West because of sanctions. It's also aware that China's keeping a little bit of its powder dry. At the United Nations, when the vote was taken on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's notable that China did not support Russia, it abstained. And I think that's put the thought in the back of the Russian minds that while they can certainly rely for strong rhetoric on China, sometimes when it comes to that final putting down of the money on the table, something like a UN vote, they can't always bet that Beijing will do exactly what Moscow would want.
Rana Missa, Professor of the History and Politics of Modern China at Oxford, thanks as ever for your insights. Let's turn now to a brutal story that comes out of Italy. On Friday last week, a Nigerian street seller was beaten to death in broad